Okay, today in this section we're going to talk about assessments. Now, what do we mean by an assessment? This is not me assessing you, this is you assessing something. So let's talk about what we actually mean. An assessment, one definition of an assessment is a logical analysis of a situation. You're in a car accident and the insurance adjuster comes to assess the damage to your car. Okay, he's going to look at your car, he's going to try to figure out how much it costs, he's going to try to see who is at fault so he knows if his insurance company should pay or someone else should pay. So it's not an emotional thing, it's a very logical thing, and it could be an analysis of any number of situations. For the purpose of this course, we're going to assess situations that have some sort of physics content. Maybe we'd assess the feasibility of using solar power in a certain situation. Maybe we'll assess some potential aspects of global warming. Maybe we'll assess the feasibility of a terrorist attack via a certain attack vector, something like this. All right, so we're going to drag science into our assessments, although an assessment doesn't necessarily have to have physics in it, but ours will because this is a physics course. Now, before we get into the details of how to write an assessment itself, I'd like to discuss just the Dinger 10 rules, 10 golden rules for writing in general. This is for any kind of writing where you're trying to communicate an idea, whether it's an assessment or an essay. If you're trying to communicate an idea, these golden rules may apply to you. These are from John Dinger, who's a former principal deputy assistant secretary in the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research. And while he was in that position, he used to regularly lecture on his 10 golden rules. And so with his permission, I grabbed his 10 golden rules and I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. I think they're really fabulous. So first, make your work easy to understand. Imagine you're explaining the issue to your elderly aunt in Iowa who knows nothing about it. You don't want to get all technical on somebody. Perhaps you're writing an analysis of a situation and you may be an expert on this topic, but maybe the policymaker that you're writing this for is not an expert. You need to write it for your audience. You have to make this document understandable to whoever in your audience may need to read it. Write it in plain English. Use everyday language, including contractions. There's nothing wrong with saying don't, won't, this kind of thing, all right? Contractions are perfectly okay. We're talking everyday English. Not slang, but everyday English. Don't use jargon, POLIF, GOF instead of Government of France. Don't use foreign words unless they're already well integrated into the English language. You could use the word chic, I guess, if it would ever come up, even though it's a French word, because it's a real part of the English language now. But don't throw in other foreign words, okay? Not everyone may be as fluent in these other foreign words as you are. Don't use foreign words, don't use foreign currencies. If you're trying to evaluate the damage of a train derailment in France, don't give the damage in euros. Okay, give the damage in US dollars, because even though it's in France and it's going to cost the French so many euros to fix the problem, we think in dollars here. So convert and give the approximate dollar equivalent. Use we, us, the French. Use dollars always. Use, in general, I hate to say this as a scientist, but use English units, inches, feet, miles. Don't go metric unless we don't have a good English unit. For example, we don't have a convenient English unit for power. We use watt in the US. That's okay, use watt. In other words, use the units that we conventionally use here in the US. When you give dates, don't give them in the military order, give them month, day, year. That's the most common way people think about dates, so you should do that in this. Basically, what we're trying to avoid is any kind of speed bump. Anything that slows the reader down because they have to translate jargon, or if they have to translate an acronym, that's slowing them down. We don't want to do that. If they have to kind of convert money, if they have to kind of convert units, if they don't know that GOF is Government of France and they have to think about it a while, that's what we need to avoid. We don't want to slow the reader down. We want the reader to get to the information content as fast as possible and get through the information content as fast as possible. Organize your thoughts. I can't emphasize this enough. Make an outline. It'll save you enormous amounts of time down the line if you make an outline first. You can think about it in your mind, but write that outline down on paper. It'll really make things much better. It'll impose order on what you write. It'll help you develop powerful topic sentences because you can use the headings and subheadings in your outline directly as topic sentences to punch right into a new topic or the next section of your piece. You have to include in your piece why the issue is significant. I mean, why is your policymaker wasting his time reading this stuff? You have to make it very clear that you're not wasting your time. This is critical information. And why is it critical information? You have to build a consistent, inviting structure. You want to have a subject line that immediately grabs the attention of the reader. Think about it if it's newspaper headlines. You might have a headline, 12-year-old girl abducted. That'll grab people's attention versus there was a crime in Lower Manhattan last week. Okay? Both could be about the same topic, but there was a crime in Lower Manhattan last week doesn't get anyone's attention. All right? You need to write a summary, and this summary actually, in an assessment, we'll talk about it, it goes in the front of the piece, and that summary, you want that to grab the reader. The reader will look at that and say, oh, I need to read the rest of this story. This is good stuff. All right? So you'll end up putting that at the beginning. But when you write your summary, make that the last thing you write, because now the whole piece has been generated, you got it, it's all on paper, and now it's fresh in your mind to grab the most important parts of that and stick it up in the summary right at the front. Okay, this is a little arbitrary, but in fact it's a good rule of thumb. Maximum 10 paragraphs, 7 sentences per paragraph, and 15 words per sentence. Okay, this is not a hard and fast rule, but it's a pretty good one to stick to. If you see really long sentences, they take longer for the person to figure out than shorter, snappier sentences. You may be bothered at first. In high school and in college writing classes, you will have learned to write sentences that flow into each other, that have a certain rhythm to them. And these short, snappy sentences might offend you at first. But in fact, they make for easy, concise reading. Use ticks to present multiple points. That is to say, bulleted lists are great because with a very minimum, you don't have to have a full sentence, and so very minimal number of words, you have punchy ideas that are there and get the point across very efficiently. Bulleted lists are fantastic to use in all kinds of writing where you're trying to be brief, succinct, and clear, but especially in assessments. Okay, the second half of the Dinger rules. Make your piece dynamic. Definitely use active tense. Never use passive tense. Sometimes it feels a little awkward. Like in scientific writing, this is a tough one for me because in scientific writing we tend to use passive voice. We tend to say the voltage was measured. Okay, that's passive voice. Never want to use passive voice in an assessment or in any dynamic piece. Passive voice tends to sort of put people to sleep. You want to make it, you know, the researcher measured the voltage is better than the voltage was measured, because at least questions your mind, well, wait a minute, was measured by whom? Who measured this voltage? So use something dynamic, use active voice. And then it's much better if you use a simple past tense, like tells us. Don't use has told us, or will have let us known, or something like this. That's too wordy. It might be exactly the proper tense to use, but if it's too wordy and the person has to think, wait a minute, will have, let, okay, I get it. That's too much time. Okay? You really need to make it snappy, punchy, direct as possible. Look at supports, not would support. Okay? Extra words. It's just stuff that the reader has to wade through to get to the idea. All right? Don't hide the verbs. This is an interesting one. Most people violate this when they write. We'll say conduct an analysis. It sounds more sophisticated, you know. He conducted an analysis rather than just simply he analyzed it. All right? Well, he analyzed it, gets the message across, less words, and all you're trying to do is get the message across in as few words as possible. So why go with this conduct an analysis? Assess, conduct an assessment. Just assess it. Don't conduct an assessment. You see, the difference is this may sound more sophisticated. Maybe you're from the days when a school assignment had to be so many words and you're trying to pad it with these words. Maybe that's not the reason. Maybe you just think it sounds more professional. Well, it's not. Not in an assessment, it's not. You need to be short as possible. Energize it. Rely on a thesaurus to find interesting, active, vigorous words. Now, you got to be careful with this one because it could sound like you swallowed a thesaurus and you're spitting it out in front of the person. If you're using words just because they sound cool, but they're not very common words, you're going to slow the reader down. The other thing is maybe by using the thesaurus, you'll come up with a word and say, wow, that sounds like a cool word. I didn't know it meant that, and you'll use it, but the connotations are wrong. The reader may know, and you didn't. So you may misuse words. I use a thesaurus, but the way I use a thesaurus is, I know there's a word for this, I just can't come up with it. I know there's a better word. I go to the thesaurus and find the word that I had in mind. That tends to be a better way to use the thesaurus than just simply finding a fancier word. You're not after fancy words. You're just after the right word. And a thesaurus is a good tool to help you find the right word. Most word processors have built-in thesauruses now. Keep it lean. This is kind of going along with don't hide the verbs. You want to eliminate all words and information that aren't essential. Okay? You never want to slow down the reader. Policymakers have to read enormous amounts of material. They have to decide what they're going to read and what they're going to dish off to their subordinates to read. Okay? You're competing for the time of the person who's going to read your piece. Well, one way to get that person to read your piece and then read the next piece you write is to not be wordy. All right? Get the information in there as short and quickly as possible. That way, whoever reads your piece before, when they have to read a new piece of yours, they'll say, I know this person. This person gets to the point right away. I'll read this one. I don't want to have to read through this person's long-winded piece. Smooth overall speed bumps. This is along the same lines. Never slow down the reader. One thing you can do is read your piece out loud and see, wow, am I really, wow, this sentence is really going on a long time. Do I really want to use that extra little clause in there or not? Okay, so reading out loud is a good way to look for speed bumps. And then the final thing is just write it. I mean, put your ideas on paper. Make your outline and then put things on papers. Don't sit there and decide what's the absolutely most perfect way to express this. Generate your outline. When you're happy with the outline, write the piece. Because nowadays, in the days of word processors, you can smooth it and polish it all you want. But if you just sit there and think about it for days and days, you're not getting that work on paper. And that's what you got to do. You got to get that stuff on paper. Those are the Dinger 10 Golden Rules of Writing. I think they're fabulous. Okay, now this is a really important topic. The structure of an assessment. They often call it an inverted pyramid structure. So when we learn to write in high school and in creative writing classes in university, what we learn about is all kinds of useful constructions. We ask hypothetical questions, we make statements and then test the statement. In scientific writing, we like to build up an argument. We start with this fact and this fact, put them together, get the new fact, get these other facts, put them together, get another fact. And then finally, we've built up to the inescapable conclusion, which is the topic of the piece. Okay? You don't do that in an assessment. An assessment is completely upside down from that structure. Here's a normal essay. You take some facts, you put them together, you get some conclusions, you take those conclusions, you put them together, you get your final conclusion. Ta-da, I've written my paper. But that's not the way you want to write an assessment. This is the way you write most essays, but not the way you want to write an assessment. You want to write an assessment the way a journal article, a journalism article would be written. You start off with your final conclusion. Then you give a little bit of detail of why that conclusion is correct. Well, that conclusion came from this and this. Well, where did these guys come from? Well, this came from this and this and this, and this came from this and this and this. Why do you want to have this so-called inverted pyramid structure? The reason you want to have the inverted pyramid structure is because you don't know if your reader is going to have enough time to get through your entire piece. You need to give the most important information first. Now, if this important information piqued the interest of the reader, then she or he may go to that, well, how did they come to that conclusion? And then they'll get to this. And they'll say, is this really true? And then they'll get to that. But if they're already satisfied with this, they're done. They've gotten what they need. So doing it this way, the reader doesn't have to go through the entire piece in order to get your point. Here they do. They could jump to the end of the thing and hope that what they found was your final conclusion. Of course, they might accidentally jump onto a sub-conclusion. Here, there's no question. You start with the most important thing. Think about how a journal article would go, a newspaper article. So you first have the event, okay? A 12-year-old girl was abducted from her home, okay? Boom. That's going to get the people's attention. That tells the story. Then you say, well, she lived in this neighborhood. It looks like there was somebody had broken in, da-da-da-da. That's kind of the next thing, all right? Then you get down into the little details that people sometimes want to know about if they have time to read. Oh, the father was a bricklayer, the mother was a school teacher, the girl was very popular in her class, her name was Little Janie, da-da-da-da-da. Okay? That's not essential for the main point, is that a kidnapping occurred, okay? And it's still unsolved. But if people want to read more and more and more, they can. You don't start by saying, oh, there was a girl and she's very popular in her class and her father's a bricklayer and her mother's a school teacher, etc., etc. Oh, they lived in such and such a neighborhood and da-da-da-da. Oh, and by the way, that girl was just kidnapped. Nah, it doesn't make sense. Okay? Okay, as I say, make your assessment like a good newspaper article. You need to have the structure. As I said, you first give the big story, the big news first, then you fill in the details, the most important details, and then you give the little stuff, the human interest stuff, if necessary. The content, well, you want to keep the reader's interest by snappy, attention-grabbing subheadings. Even corny is good if it keeps the reader's attention. So for example, if you're reading a magazine article, right, you'll see that there'll be subheadings in the magazine article. So you'll be reading along and you'll say, okay, that's really interesting. And then they'll throw another subheading at you. Oh, wow, that sounds interesting. And then you'll read the subheading. And then just when you're saying, okay, I think I know enough, they'll throw another interesting subheading at you. And it keeps bringing you through the whole piece that way. And I say even corny is good if it keeps the reader's attention. People are, even if they groan and say, oh, that's an awful pun, still, it'll stick with them. Oh, there was an awful pun. Doesn't matter. At least they're reading it. Okay? So even if it's corny, it's okay. Just keep that reader's attention. You're in a constant battle for the time and attention of your readers. All right, that's what I have to say about assessments. You'll get your first assessment assignment very soon. Are there any questions?
What I'd like to do is talk a little bit more about the upcoming homework assignment. And this is something you're going to write in whatever your favorite word processor is. You're going to convert it to a PDF file, so make sure you know how to do that. You don't want to not be able to turn in your assignment just simply because you haven't gotten around to figure out how to make a PDF out of your whatever you use for your editing. Then you're going to upload this. You're not going to email it to me. You're going to upload this to Canvas. Okay? And if you've never done that before, I haven't, but if you've never done that before, that might take time too. So leave yourself, especially on this first assignment, leave yourself enough room. All right, so let me go over this again. And something very similar to this, you should be able to find on Canvas. Try to see if you can see this assignment. Because if you can't see this assignment, you won't be able to respond to the assignment by uploading your file. Okay, so everyone should go out there and make sure you can see the assignment. It's worded a little differently than this. So here it is. Remember, this is an assessment, not an essay. Can't remember the difference? Go to the lecture in which I talked about this and check to see what I mean by an assessment. Okay? It's not an essay. You're not just trying to convince somebody of something. You're trying to do an analysis, an impartial analysis. I don't care how few words you use, as long as you make your point. Okay, as long as the analysis is as complete as it can be, given an 800-word max limit. I don't care if it's double-spaced or single-spaced. I do want it to be 12-pitch and Times New Roman font. That tends to be kind of the standard in government work in the U.S. If your native language is not English, tell me. Okay, I'm still going to try to count off. If it's really sloppy, unreadable, I have to count off. But I do take into account if your native language is not English. Okay. Fortunately, our word processors help us out here by pointing out when we make, most of the time, pointing out when we make grammar or spelling mistakes. Okay. Now, I just did a couple really simple computations in here. Okay. You can make similar computations when you're doing this analysis. If, for example, you're talking about a crop duster filled with gasoline, you can look up online to see what the load capacity of a crop duster is. And you can say, okay, and then look on this chart that I gave you, or look online, what the energy content of gasoline is per gallon. And then you can do the computation and say, well, this is how much energy this thing is hauling in. That's a simple computation. And then you can compare it to something else. You can say, well, like, what's the equivalent amount of TNT? Or what's the equivalent in terms of something else that might be useful for the given situation that you're talking about? Put it in units that the reader can understand and can relate to. Okay? So those are very simple computations. If you have difficulty with, by simple I don't mean you should all know them automatically. By simple I mean not lots of terms in them. Okay? I don't mean easy. I mean not complex with lots and lots of different terms and using calculus and what have you. By simple I mean not a lot of terms. I don't necessarily mean easy. So if you have difficulty trying to do some of these computations, which I'm calling simple, come see me. I'll help you out. Okay, that's what I'm here for. As I said, I do grade for clarity, for grammar, spelling, etc., given what your native language is, taking that into account.